The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy Tuesday. Hope you had a good weekend. Hope you had a good day yesterday. All right, I have a few things I'm going to play for you guys today, but before I do, let me talk about the two biggest, I guess, current events over the weekend. First of all, it does look like they've taken somebody into custody in regards to the shooting of the UnitedHealthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. Let me say a couple things on this. One is, this situation, kind of exposed a ton of different things. And if not exposed, it brought to light again, a variety of things, namely UnitedHealthcare. Their denial rate on claims was, I believe, 32 or 33%, which is double the industry average. And they're the largest healthcare provider with double the industry average of denials. So that's not good in and of itself. And then secondly, it came out that they were using like automated AI software to analyze a lot of those cases. And so there wasn't even a human element, which obviously I think you need a human element when it comes to healthcare in order to be able to, really, I guess, have empathy towards what's needed. And so, all these things came to light because of the killing of the CEO. And, it really like brought out, in my opinion, like the worst in society and the worst in people. And what I mean by that is, like in New York City on Sunday, there was like a competition to dress like the assassin. So like the guy, I'm blanking on his name, but they have somebody in custody. But to dress like, I think his name is Luigi something. He's a young 26-year-old kid, super good-looking kid. I'll talk about that in a second. But for example, on Sunday in New York City, there was this competition of dressing like the assassin. And so all these people showed up in kind of a greenish, jacket with a hoodie and, face covering and all that. And, it got covered on the news. And, again, I don't know. I found that pretty disgusting, to be honest with you. Like, regardless of what you feel about UnitedHealthcare, their denial rate, and quite frankly, the corporate greed that, I'm sure their executive team and, most executive teams to an extent are guilty of, to almost make a joke out of an assassination like that. I don't know. I just found that so just bad. And like, unfortunately, a perfect reflection of really the state of, I guess, lack of a moral compass that I feel like we're in right now as a country. Honestly, I mean, I don't know. I really, like, I can't justify the assassination of a CEO, even with, shady business practices. And again, I mean, this is easier said than done. I was having this discussion with somebody over the weekend, and they said, well, what if it was your mom or your dad when he was alive that needed a procedure or something and UnitedHealthcare denied him? And obviously, I mean, again, to be fair and to call a spade and to do the role reversal, which I talk about a lot, I mean, I hear you on that. I mean, I do hear you on that. I don't know if I could ever get to a point where, I mean, actually, I do know I could never get to a point where I would take vengeance and think that was like an eye for an eye. But could I understand it better? I mean, God, I hate to say it, but probably. But still, that's a tough one, man. That is definitely a tough one because again, when you do personalize it, so like when my buddy was like, imagine if it was life or death thing for your mom or for your dad, and it was denied, and your loved one died, your mom or dad died. Again, I hate to even talk like that, but you know what? That's real talk, and that's when you really can, I guess, look at both sides of everything. So, I mean, I hear you on that. I really do. Gosh, unfortunately, I do. But I would like to think that I would look to exhaust every other possible, I guess, every other possible way of getting back at that versus kind of the route that was taken. So anyway, this 26-year-old kid that was found in, it looks like Altoona, Pennsylvania, which was about 280 miles away from, the Hilton in New York City the assassination happened. I mean, he definitely looks like the images. Now, a couple things that I just found odd with this kid is, first of all, I found it odd he was snitched out at I shouldn't say snitched, actually. That's another thing I want to talk about. He was someone at a McDonald's recognized him and called the cops, and so they arrested him at a McDonald's. This is funny. McDonald's has been in the news a lot lately. There was the Trump being, serving the drive-through at McDonald's. And then immediately after that, there was like a huge E. coli breakout. And now McDonald's again. But again, I guess one of the McDonald's employees recognized him. Now, here's the things that I just don't get. First of all, for that kid, Luigi, whatever his last name is, he must have never watched the movie The Outsiders. Remember the movie The Outsiders? Man, that had like a crazy cast. All right, hold on. I got to riff on The Outsiders for a minute. So I just asked ChatGPT, who was the cast of the movie The Outsiders? So the 1983 movie The Outsiders, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, is based on the novel by S.E. Hinton, featuring a star-studded cast of actors who went on to have notable careers. C. Thomas Howell as Ponyboy Curtis. Remember Ponyboy Curtis? Ralph Macchio, who I looked like as a kid, as Johnny Cade, and I think they called him Johnny Cakes. Matt Dillon as Dally Winston, Patrick Swayze as Daryl Derry Curtis, Rob Lowe as Soda Pop Curtis. Remember that? That's funny. Emilio Estevez as Two-Bit Matthews, Tom Cruise as Steve Randall, Diane Lane as Cherry Valance, Leif Garrett as Bob Shelton, and Glenn Withrow as Tim Shepard. I think Glenn Withrow is probably the least well-known of that bunch, but man, that crew went on to be called the Brat Pack due to their prominence in films and TV throughout the 1980s and 1990s. The Brat Pack. Man, that was a serious crew. But if you remember in the movie The Outsiders, after I believe it was Ralph Macchio's character, Johnny Cade, killed that one guy in like their little street fight, he basically like cut his hair, dyed it blonde, and really made himself look different. Whereas it looks like this kid in the assassination, and by the way, his name is Luigi Mangione, a nice Italian lad. He did not seem to like change his appearance at all. And so like I'm very surprised at that because he was a Ivy League graduate. He was valedictorian of his high school class, which seemed like a private, prestigious high school. And so, I'm sure having a cell phone, he probably saw those pictures of himself where he took off his mask and supposedly he was flirting with the gal at the hostel. But like, dude, if you see all that is everywhere on the internet, how are you going to even remotely dress the same and remotely even look the same for that matter? Yeah, seriously. Like again, it doesn't say what he looked like when the random person at McDonald's called it in. But again, I'm assuming if a random person at McDonald's was savvy enough to make the connection between a random person in the restaurant and this kid, he must have looked relatively the same. So like that was weird to me. And then when the cops arrested him, they found on his possession a gun, a silencer, and then like a 3-page manifesto criticizing health insurance companies for profits and stuff. Like, why would you carry that with you? Now, again, I'll say all that and I'll caveat it with, if you just literally like murdered somebody in relatively broad daylight at 6:45 a.m. and you're on the run, maybe you're not thinking totally clearly. So again, I do get that. And it's not like this kid had a tremendous, criminal past. I mean, for all intents and purposes, he's like a white collar kid that comes from a, ridiculously good family and all that. He was like a data engineer for TrueCar, according to his LinkedIn profile. I've used TrueCar. It's not really that good. But anyway, my point is that I found a little bit of that odd, the things with him. But, again, we shall see. I'm not saying that that's not him or this is some type of setup or anything like that. And I'm not saying anything along those lines. All I'm saying is that, like, gosh, you would think he would have like buried the gun somewhere that would never be found, buried the silencer, miles away from that. You wouldn't think he'd be carrying around a healthcare manifesto, thinking like, oh man, if I get caught, I don't want him to have this or see that I've got this on my person. But anyway, all right, so that's that. Let's see what comes of it. But I did want to say I was a little bit disgusted at the way people kind of were trivializing it. And again, like I said, I'm not advocating for the actions of UnitedHealthcare or any of that stuff. All I'm saying is, we cannot have a society where anarchy is accepted like that. And man, if you went on Twitter, holy mackerel, that was a divided, toxic cesspool as it normally is. But you had a ton of people. I guess I do want to say defending them because they kind of were defending them. Anyway, all right, there's that. The second big thing that happened over the weekend was the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, where his family had reigned for over 50 years, was like seemingly overthrown in what felt like a New York minute. And it really was in less than a week. I'm actually still trying to gather some info on this, so I'm not going to talk too much about this right now. But what I will say is I'm very surprised he was overthrown that easily, it seems, because again, you're talking about a dictatorship family that's ruled for over 50 years, and then I think Assad himself, Bashar, I think he's ruled for close to 20. You would think he would have stronger, I guess defenses than to be taken out is seemingly easy as it was. It actually reminded me a lot of when the Shah of Iran was like taken down in 1979. At that time, again, he was super powerful. And then again, it was like, boom, he wasn't. And so anyway, I'm trying to piece a few things together because there's a lot of weird stuff on this. And I don't know a ton about Syria, to be honest. And so I want to try and like research this a little bit more. But, fundamentally, he's out and these rebel forces that are now in power. I mean, the crazy thing about these rebel forces is they are like the second or third incarnation of al-Qaeda and ISIS. And so it's really interesting that you've got, I guess now, the leaders of Syria are what previously would have been, the hated al-Qaeda ISIS. And then the guy that's the leader, like I said, I'll get into this more later this week, but the guy was doing interviews on CNN. And it's like he was on like a PR tour. And remember, he is supposedly, second, third generation al-Qaeda, ISIS, who are terrorist organizations. I don't know. I found that a little bit odd as well. All right, that's a perfect segue. And it's a segue into the next clip I'm going to play for you. I played this a long time ago, but man, I think it really is worth hearing again, and maybe we'll dissect it a little bit more. So give a listen. This is 2007. This is a guy named General Wesley Clark. Again, if you are a longtime listener, you'll know I like this guy. Well, I shouldn't say I like the guy. I kind of do like him, but I definitely liked this clip. But like I've said a few times, once he did this interview, which I believe was on Democracy Now!, he really never spoke about this tremendously again. And I think that's because he was kind of told to shut up. But give this a listen.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs.
Really quick, sorry. Remember, this is 2007, and that, again, Secretary Rumsfeld. Remember Donald Rumsfeld, head of the Defense Department, Paul Wolfowitz, also Dick Cheney, George W. Bush. This was that group of people that are referred to as the neoconservatives, the neocons, and really like the original gangsters, in my opinion.
Just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail."
So again, remember, Iraq and Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11, okay? It was pinned on Osama bin Laden and the Saudis. So the fact that, again, we went to war in Iraq, it really makes no sense. But like I've talked before, that Middle East is kind of like one big country to most of Americans, so nobody really questioned anything. And remember, this is where the whole, we need a reason to do this. Oh, he's got weapons of mass destruction. This was where the whole WMD's weapons of mass destruction, which turned out to be a gigantic lie, and they knew that the whole time, but that's where that all came up, and that enabled the invasion in Iraq.
So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years."
Okay, again, so remember, we had already been in Afghanistan. Now we were going to war in Iraq. And so this memo talked about taking out 7 countries in 5 years. Now listen to the countries that he says are in this memo. Obviously, it did not take 5 years. It's probably going to take closer to 20 years. So at this point, I think it's either 2002. Yeah, it's 2002. He's telling the story in 2007, but it's from 2002. So really, that would be 2022, 20 years from now, or 22 years from now in 2024.
Starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Okay, so he says starting in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. Now, if you've been paying attention, Lebanon obviously has been in the mix. And then now Syria is in the mix because of this situation with Israel that started with Gaza. And then remember, Lebanon, that's Hezbollah. That's what's been going on really for the past couple months. And so now Syria. So there's three of them.
Starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Okay, so Libya, Somalia, and Sudan. Libya was Gaddafi in 2012, which again I will talk about, and then Somalia and Sudan. I mean, we don't hear much about those two countries, but they've been completely at war and in disarray for over a decade. And again, what these countries all have in common is they're all ridiculously oil rich.
Starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
All right, sorry, that was a little repetition as the mother of all learning. I played those country clips a few times. Just again, reinforce and remember, finishing off with Iran. So Iran is really going to be, the last country standing of those seven, and really probably the hardest and most important in terms of, trying to basically have regime change. All right. Anyway, I did want to play that. I thought that was a good clip to kind of listen to now after all of this stuff, especially with Syria being, another domino that's fallen. So anyway, more on that coming. All right. Next up, I did want to revisit this because I got a couple pieces of feedback saying that they thought a few people either thought or think I was too harsh on Pete Hegseth. So, okay, no problem. And then one person was like, hey, did you see this clip? His mom went back on, or not back, but his mom went on Fox News to clear the air about that email that she sent in 2018. So when I watched the clip, I was like, okay, you know what? Let me play that for everybody. So here is a clip from Pete Hegseth's mom, who went on Fox News to address the New York Times story, which basically talked about how she sent her son, that scathing email in 2018, pretty much calling him a womanizer and an abuser and telling him to change his ways. So give this a listen. First, you'll hear from the Fox broadcaster, and then it'll be his mom.
This is to Pete during the 2018 divorce. You say, I have no respect for any man that belittles, lies, cheats, and sleeps around. And you go on and say, you are that man and have been for years. And as your mother, it pains me and embarrasses me to say that, but it is a sad, sad truth. You say, we still love you, but we are broken by your behavior and your lack of character. Mm-hmm. When you wrote that, what's the backstory? What was going on that made you so angry you wanted to write that?
All right, again, just to clarify, because I think that was a little bit hard to hear, but that was the Fox newscaster or whatever, basically reading the mother her email that she wrote to her son, Pete Hegseth, in 2018. And so now here we are 6 years later in 2024, and her son is up for the Secretary of Defense. And now here is the mom appearing on Fox News.
Well, I will tell that story in a moment, but let me make two statements first, and one is to President Trump. And I want to say thank you for your belief in my son. We all believe in him. We really believe that he is not that man he was 7 years ago. I'm not that mother. And I hope people will hear that story today and the truth of that story. So the other thing I want to say is I am here to tell the truth to the American people and tell the truth to the senators on the Hill. Right. Especially our female senators. I really hope that you will not listen to the media and that you will listen to Pete. Let's go back 7 years, which if we all went back 7 years, we would see that maybe we were not the people we are today. But they were going through, Pete and his wife at the time were going through a very difficult divorce. It was a very emotional time, and I'm sure many of you across the country understand how difficult divorce is on a family. There's emotions. We say things, and I wrote that in haste.
Really quick, again, I mean, oh my goodness. Talk about what it takes for a mother to send her son something like that. You know what I mean? Like, I could totally understand the ex-wife sending it, a girlfriend. I might even be able to understand a sister sending something that brutal. But man, for a mom to send something that brutal to her own son, I think that speaks volumes. And so, again, this is just backtracking right now and trying to do damage control in terms of, the mom, because her son's up for the Secretary of Defense job. I mean, this is so obvious. To me, this kind of does more harm than good, but let's listen to the rest of it.
I wrote that with deep emotions. I wrote that as a parent, and about 2 hours later, I should. My husband tells me I should think through things a little bit more, but Pete and I are both very passionate people. I wrote that out of love. And about 2 hours later, I retracted it with an apology email, but nobody's seen that.
So this is funny, and for some reason, nobody is calling her out on this. So she said in that interview that she retracted it 2 hours later with an apology email, and then you heard her say, but nobody's seen that. That's because she hasn't presented that email, because that email probably doesn't exist. So if you really did write an apology email 2 hours later, why is that apology email not everywhere? And why don't you read that right now on the air during this Fox interview?
So it was a difficult time. I want to say something about the media. And part of today is to discredit the media.
I find this hilarious. Again, she did not say, okay, here's the email I sent 2 hours later. If she read that on the air, case closed. Okay, I'll give it to you. But she doesn't do that. But instead, she's like, part of today is to discredit the media. Of course it is. Of course you're trying to discredit the media, because your email that the media, brought to light discredits your son.
And how they operate. When they contact you, I let a few phone calls go, but then they call you and say they threaten you. That's the first thing they do. Right. They say, unless you make a statement, we will publish it as is. And I think that's a despicable way to treat anyone. Threats are dangerous, and they're hard on families.
Okay, so again, just to reinforce my point, they don't threaten you. They basically say, care to comment? This is what we're running. Would you like to comment? So obviously she didn't like to comment. And again, if she had that email that she wrote 2 hours later, she would have said, oh, yes, I do care to comment. I actually retracted that, and I sent Pete another email 2 hours later when I had calmed down, and here is the secondary email. And if you don't run the secondary email, I'll go to another news source and say that you only ran the first email, you didn't run the second email. So again, this is just real talk, man. If you're a Republican and you're a supporter of, that side, you've got to call a spade. I said, this guy's not a good candidate. And again, you can't justify him as a candidate just because he's Trump's candidate. You just can't. So anyway, this thing is definitely spiraling, not even spiraling. It's continuing to get discussed. Pete Hegseth is going on a bunch of conservative talk shows and podcasts to, again, give his side. So here he is on Megyn Kelly.
In many ways, I found two things, my two J's. My Jenny, my wife Jennifer, changed my life, and my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And without those two J's, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. But with those two J's, like my mom said this morning, and I didn't get a chance to see all of it, but God bless my mom, I'm a very different person than I was 10 years ago, than I was 15 years ago.
All right, first of all, it was 6 years ago. And then that's funny. So his two J's, Jenny, his third wife, by the way, and you cheated on your first two, and then Jesus Christ, his Lord and Savior. You know, you don't get to call out Jesus as a scapegoat for everything. I'm sorry, you just don't. Although, again, that's part of the shtick. That's part of the shtick. All right, listen to the rest of this.
But I'm also the right guy to be in the Pentagon to understand what our young warfighters are going through. What we send them to do, what we ask them to do, tour after tour after tour after tour.
Okay, this is exactly why you're not the right guy, because we shouldn't be sending our young warriors to do tour after tour after tour after tour. We should be getting out of these wars. And here's what's funny. Trump's whole thing is no more wars. Let's get out of these wars. He's primarily talking Ukraine, but hopefully he's talking, the war in the Middle East as well. So here's a presidential, the president saying no more wars, and then your Secretary of Defense is like saying, hey, I understand the mentality of our guys when we continue to send them to war.
Are we equipping them properly? Are they mentally prepared? Are we helping them on the way back? How are they transitioning? Were they used properly?
Were they used properly? Now, again, I know he's using used in a different connotation, but I'm using the word used in a using connotation.
I can speak to that because I've lived it. Not from a general's perspective, not from an air-conditioned office in Washington, D.C., or from a think tank, from dusty boots and pulling triggers with bullets whizzing by, and you're wondering whether you're ever coming home.
All right, anyway, that's enough on Pete Hegseth. Again, I honestly think Trump knows he's not going to get confirmed. I think this is, again, a quid pro quo for Miriam Adelson and that entire Zionist, Christian, evangelical faction that basically wants pro-Israel people in his cabinet. Hegseth is absolutely that guy because, again, from everything, it just doesn't make sense. And I think Trump in round two has the right people around him, at least to an extent, and is also, savvy enough himself this time to realize he's not the guy. But again, like I said, I think this is just a quid pro quo. It's someone that he knows won't get confirmed. I'd be ridiculously surprised if this guy gets confirmed. If he does, then I think we're in a different kind of trouble. All right, there's that. All right, last thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'll end it. The trial of that guy, Daniel Penny, came to an end yesterday. And honestly, thank God he was acquitted finally and basically set free. This is the guy that put the dude on the New York subway in a stranglehold because the guy was basically had mental illness and he was literally freaking out on everybody saying somebody's going to die today, somebody's going to die today. And then this Daniel Penny guy basically started to restrain him. It got violent and he ended up putting him in a chokehold and that guy ended up dying from it. But man, this was a situation where this was just self-defense, and not only self-defense on himself, but he was protecting everybody else on that train. And again, if anybody feels differently, I would say do that role reversal that I've talked about and think about if you were on that subway at 7 a.m. in New York trying to go to work and some lunatic is yelling that somebody's going to die today and you don't have the guts to do anything. Do you not want somebody to step forward and try and act on your behalf? For God forbid that guy would have all of a sudden made eye contact with you and then charged at you with a knife and stabbed you to death. I'm not kidding. Think about it like that. So anyway, I'm glad Daniel Penny got let off of this. That was not a racial crime because the guy he killed was black. Daniel Penny's white. That was not a racial crime. It just wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. It was a crime against somebody that unfortunately did have some sort of mental illness. But again, that person was incredibly violent. Alrighty, man, a little bit of a doozy of an episode, 35 minutes. All right, everybody, call a spade a spade. Have a good day. We will talk to you soon.
That was a great way to end it.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, Available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.